The first issue that faces the President administration is that the U.S. needs to undertake domestic action. And this is the big problem right now, is what would the U.S. do? How aggressively would it go after greenhouse gas emissions and reducing those emissions? There's a bill that has just been introduced in the U.S. Senate, which I think would position the U.S. well with respect to its leadership in the world, but it's very unclear whether that's going to pass the U.S. Senate or not. If that does not pass, it does not mean the U.S. is not going to take domestic action. The Clean Air Act, which is one of our major environmental statutes, is in place, and we will regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. So I think the U.S. will become a player on the world stage with some credibility, but it may take a few more years for that to become apparent. Then, of course, the administration is heavily engaged in discussions, bilateral discussions, certainly with China and India, to provide incentives for those countries to join a larger scale action across the major emitters or the major economies to reduce emissions. And so I think the U.S. administration is certainly very much committed to bringing those countries into the fold in some sense to reduce emissions, but that's all predicated on the assumption that the U.S. will get its own house in order and reduce its emissions at home. There are bilateral incentives with respect to China having to do with trade and property rights and technologies and what have you. Again, I don't think there's going to be an awful lot of enthusiasm with respect to the U.S. Congress for massive amounts of money to flow from the U.S. to China. The investments the Chinese are going to have to undertake themselves, but I do think there's going to be coordination with respect to trade, international technology flows, intellectual property, and what have you.